Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for Ask the ARC. My name is Carly Schertino Poulter, and I'm the director of the ARC Advocacy Network here at the ARC of Indiana. And more importantly, I'm a fellow mom. I've got a 24-year-old son with autism, and I have an 18-year-old son with anxiety and depression and ADHD. And so I live this life on a daily basis too. And, as I was trying to think about, what kind of a topic to share in April, especially as it's Autism Awareness Month, you know, part of it was reflecting back on my journey as a parent and thinking about all of the common things that are all of the things that we have in common as parents, especially, but as family members, as individuals with disabilities, and we have a lot in common. And, when you're a parent, or actually before you're ever even a parent, when you're just thinking about starting a family, naturally, we all have dreams. We dream about what it's going to be like to be a parent. We dream about what our child's going to be like. We dream about the things we're going to do with them. Maybe that's your dream is that you're going to be the little league coach, or you're going to make cookies and you know impart your love of cooking to your child, or maybe you're thinking about them growing up and being a doctor or a lawyer or an architect, or whatever it is. But we all have dreams long before they are ever born. We have dreams. And when you have a child with a disability, when they are diagnosed with that disability, so often it feels like those dreams are ripped away. And that's not fair. It's not fair. It's not fair to the person with a disability, and it's not fair to us as the loved ones either. And so tonight, what I want to talk about is that we are allowed to dream, and we need to reassert our ability to dream for our loved ones, for ourselves, and make sure that we are working toward achieving those dreams. So as we go along tonight, I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. You're welcome to put your questions and your thoughts in the Q&A, and we're gonna keep going along tonight. So let me start by sharing my screen. Yeah. Because being allowed to dream is about restoring our hope, and it's about restoring possibilities for people with disabilities, and they absolutely deserve that. So when your child is diagnosed with a disability, you are inundated with the message, your child will never. You're constantly told your child will never be able to live independently. They'll never be able to manage their finances or money. They'll never be able to marry or have children of their own. They'll never be able to work. They'll not be able to graduate. And they're not going to be able to read. And the thing is, we are bombarded with that message by people who are supposed to know, by the authority figures. We're told that by doctors. We're told that by teachers, by therapists, by other family members, by people who claim they are friends. And frankly, we're told this by strangers on the street who somehow feel entitled to barge into our lives and share their opinions on all of this. And you're told your child will need complete care, or they'll need 24-hour care. They'll never be able to live on their own. They'll need daily hands-on care. They'll need constant supervision. One of the things that always gets me is, oh, you'll need to find placement. I gotta admit, I really hate that word in so many ways. Your child will need a group home, or they'll need institutional care, whether that's a nursing home, or there are still people who believe in institutions. And of course, you must get full guardianship. That's what they tell us. That's what they tell us all the time. And you know what it is? It's absolute nonsense. People with disabilities can do all sorts of things. Yes, people with disabilities are able to graduate. They're able to go to trade school and to college. They're able to work and they make great employees. They're able to socialize. They are even able to live on their own. Yes, self-advocates with intellectual and developmental disabilities can own their own business. They can own their own home. They can make their own decisions, and they can advocate for their own needs and desires. And so, in part, we need to see the possibilities. First of all, we need to not take no for an answer because so often, even when we're trying to explore opportunities, we ask, "Hey, is this a possibility?" No, no, that's not something that can happen. Well, why not? We need to stop taking no for an answer. And we need to make sure we never accept your child will never. Now, don't get me wrong, they may need to do things a different way, so we need to be open to options. But don't accept the comments, your child will never. And we need to seek out examples of successful self advocates. And when we do that, then we can help others see the possibility. When we don't take no for an answer that our child will be able to do something, and we say, oh, yes, they can, and they see us working on those things, it helps open their eyes for them to see the possibilities. It helps when we help others recognize the opportunities that are out there. And part of that is also determining the supports that a person may need to be able to achieve things. But we can help others dream. So, okay, that sounds really good. But how do you do that? Well, we're going to start by flipping the script on all of this. As families, we are so used to limited choices. We are used to choosing from established options. Okay, we've got a list of the things that are available. We're going to choose one thing from column A and two things from column B. And we revolve our lives around expectations, or we revolve our life and our expectations and our opportunities around the services that are offered. And so we need to think about this a different way. We need to start by thinking about, what do we actually want? What do we want for ourselves? What do we want for our loved ones? What do they want for themselves? What is our vision of a good life? And how do we achieve that good life? Because instead of choosing from what's available, instead of limiting our choices and revolving our lives around the services that may be out there, we need to design what we need to get what we want. And now, don't get me wrong, it's going to be a challenge, but it's absolutely possible. But it's not going to be easy, in part because this is a really systemic shift in thinking and expectations for families, for self advocates, and for professionals. And the reality is, I think a lot of families stop dreaming after the diagnosis because we are just bombarded with that message of our child will never. And so this is about deprogramming years of low expectations, of settling for what's available, years of believing your child will never. So we need to reintroduce dreams and possibilities. We need to start by assuming that people with disabilities can do things because they can. They may need supports for that, and that's okay. I think sometimes we put inappropriate and unrealistic expectations on people with disabilities. They may get the opportunity to do something, but if they don't do it perfectly the first time, they're never given the opportunity to do it again. Well, none of us have those expectations. None of us are expected to do it perfectly the first time. None of us are expected to never make mistakes or to never need help. So why do we put those expectations on people with disabilities? We need to assume competence. We need to assume that they can do things. And then we need to seek out and share stories about what people can do. So part of that is talking with other families and professionals about the successes they see and then figuring out how those successes happened. It's sharing the successes and the possibilities you see for the individual, and then sharing your experiences with others. And then it's also about seeking out new experiences because so often, you know, people with disabilities get limited by what they're exposed to. When it comes to employment, the main things they've been exposed to historically are, working in fast food restaurants, doing janitorial work, and don't get me wrong, those are great jobs. But up until recently, we didn't go beyond that. And so now we're talking about, not only, working retail and working with animals, but then we're also talking about things like starting your own business. And yes, people with disabilities can start their own businesses. We're talking about careers, not just jobs. And we're talking about making sure that people with disabilities are given the opportunities that are available, but they need to be exposed to those opportunities so that they can figure out what they want. And we need to focus on strengths, you know. Um, and I don't know about you, but it's hard for me sometimes to think about strengths. Not exclusively for people with disabilities. It's hard for me to think about my own strengths in all of this because that's not something we're used to talking about. And so, yes, we want to talk with our loved ones about what their strengths are. But I'm also going to recommend consulting with other people too, so that they're hearing from other people what those other people think of as their strengths. So maybe it's talking to your loved one's Special Olympics coach, so that coach can say, "Oh man, I love the fact that you are always right there when I need help. Man, anytime I need you, you are there. I love the fact that you are always encouraging your teammates." Maybe it's talking to your pastor and having them say the things that they view as your loved one's strengths. Maybe it's talking to their employer, or their job coach, or their service providers, or their teachers, so that they can hear all of those good things, so they can start seeing themselves through that lens of their strengths and the things that they can do, and they can get that empowerment, and they can get that self-esteem, and they can get that confidence, because by golly, there are absolutely things that they are really, really great at. But like I said, not everybody's used to looking at strengths, and that's why it's important to make sure we're getting those messages from lots of different sources. And sometimes we don't recognize the strengths that people have, and we don't recognize them as strengths. So, for example, you know, you may have somebody where they're like, "Oh, the person, they just talk all the time." Okay, I kid you not, when I was in kindergarten, my kindergarten teacher tried to convince my parents to pull me out of kindergarten because I talked too much. All through kindergarten through about 6th grade. Constantly, that was always the big thing. Carly just talks too much. Oh my goodness. We need to get rein in her talking and all of that. Well, you know what? That individual who talks all the time, that means they can tell you what they want. That means they're a good communicator. That means they're a people person. And as somebody who was constantly told that they talked all the time, guess what? As an adult, I do the same thing now, and it helps other people. Maybe they're told, they don't do well with change. Well, what that also means is they're very detail oriented. They make sure things are consistent. They recognize when something is different or something is off. Maybe they're told, oh, they have to have a list or a schedule. Okay, that means they're really good at following directions. So sometimes, we don't recognize the strengths that a person has until we view it through a different lens. We hear those criticisms without recognizing the strengths behind those criticisms. And one of the other really big things we want to do is we want to celebrate what others take for granted. Because for our loved ones, it takes a lot of effort for them to be able to do things. It takes effort for them to learn new things. And what other people get to take for granted, our loved ones don't get to take for granted. And so we want to make sure that that we are celebrating what they are able to do because it took a lot of work and it is absolutely worth celebrating. And life course tools can actually help with that. So hopefully you have seen some of these things. Hopefully you have heard about some of these things and specifically heard about the life course framework. Life course is a philosophy. I hear the life course developers in my head. It's not a program. So I need to make sure that I say it's not a program. Life course is a philosophy. And the philosophy behind Life Course is helping people figure out what they want in life. What is their vision of a good life, and how do we make it happen? Because the core belief behind Life Course is that all people, not all people with disabilities, all people have the right to live, love, work, learn, play, and pursue their life's aspirations in their community. And that absolutely applies to people with disabilities too. And so we want to start with their strengths. Now, this is part of a tool called the Life Course Portfolio. This is a 2-page tool. And by the way, you can find all of their tools and videos on how to use them at lifecoursetools.com. And the best part is they are all free. So by all means, go in and explore. But what I like about this particular piece is I call this the cheat sheet to a person because there in the upper rectangle, what do people like and admire about me? When was the last time somebody ever told your loved one that? When was the last time people made it? When was the last time people made an effort to tell you what they like and admire about you? And that applies to our loved ones too. So letting them hear those things and hear it from lots of sources is a good thing. Then in that middle rectangle, what's important to me? Again, how often does anybody ask your loved one what's important to them? And so we need to make sure that we need to encourage them to talk about the things that are important to them. And then in the bottom rectangle, how do you best support me? Because we may have ideas about the best ways to support our loved ones. They may have some other ideas about what works best for them. And then we move on to the vision tools. And yes, you're not seeing double. It's because there are two different vision tools. One is the family perspective, and one is the person's perspective. And so I actually recommend that you each fill this out and fill it out separately, and then come back together and compare them because your vision of a good life for your loved one and your loved one's vision of a good life for themselves may not always match. But what I like about these vision tools is that it breaks things down into the different life domains, the different categories of life, you know, daily living and employment, community living, social and spirituality, healthy living, safety and security, advocacy and engagement. And I cannot read those last two. So sorry, I need glasses. But really sitting down and kind of thinking about some of these things and doing them separately and coming together is a great way to start some of those discussions, but also is a great way for your loved one to feel empowered enough to say what they want in life and then to be able to come back and discuss it together. And then I'm going to encourage you to fill out the life trajectory. And we're going to see that here in a minute. But with that life trajectory, you want to include the small things in that vision of a good life. So here's the life trajectory, and this one is the split life trajectory. What I love about it is in that upper right hand rectangle, it says, "What is your vision of a good life? What do I want in life?" And you want to include all of the small things as well as the big things. So maybe your vision of a good life or your loved one's vision of a good life for themselves is eventually living on their own. It's having a job. Maybe it's even getting married. But it's also about the small things that make life enjoyable, whether that's going to GameStop, whether it's going to the movies. Um, for me, it's getting the big 44-ounce cup with the pellet ice so that I can kind of feel like I'm having a snow cone along with my Coke. Whatever for other people, it's Starbucks. They've got to have their Starbucks, you know, because those little things in life are also what make life enjoyable. But sometimes it's a little easier to say what you don't want in life. And that's what the bottom right-hand rectangle is about, is what you don't want in life. Maybe what you don't want is you don't want to be made fun of. You don't want to be disrespected. When I talk with self-advocates and we're filling these out, invariably the things they say are, I don't want to be told what to do. I don't want to be treated like a child. I'm an adult. Treat me like one. I don't want my options limited. I don't want my choices limited. And sometimes those are the easier things to answer. But what I like about this particular tool is that it is that split, that split screen there, um, in the upper left-hand corner. What past life experiences have you had that are getting you to the life you want to live? There in the middle, what are the things you still need to develop so that you can achieve what you want? There on the bottom left-hand corner, what are your past experiences that are taking you away from what you want in life? And then in the middle, what are the things you need to be careful of that may take you away from what you want? And so then we gather all the pieces together. And that's assembling a team of support. And that's going to be family and friends. That's going to be providers. And that's not just waiver providers, that can be job coaches, that can be medical providers, that can be a lot of different people in your loved one's life that help support them in what they do. But that can also be coworkers, that can be peers, and that can be professionals. And when I'm talking about professionals in this particular situation, I'm talking about, people like the bank teller or the pharmacist or the cashiers at the grocery store. Because when we make sure that we are introducing our loved ones to the professionals who they interact with, um, what Sesame Street used to call the people in our neighborhood, you know, those professionals are also going to be there to provide support to your loved one. And when you can develop those relationships, when your loved one needs something, those professionals will be willing to step in and help. So if you are constantly taking your loved one into the bank, and let's be honest, how many of us actually go into a bank anymore? Most of us, just bank online or use an ATM. Not very many of us actually go into a physical bank. But if we take our loved one into the physical bank, you know, once a week, every couple weeks, maybe even just once a month, and we're introducing them to the tellers. Hey, this is my son Andy. He's got an account here and he's, and it's, time to, deposit his paycheck. Okay, that's a bad example. But, whatever the case may be, when they see each other enough, and they get to know each other, that then if something were to ever happen, the person can go into those professionals and ask for help. So, and if Andy can't get his checking account balanced, he can go in there and say, "Hey, I need help. I can't get this balanced." Or if there's a problem with an ATM withdrawal that came through or something like that, or there, anyway, some sort of problem, because he has met them, because there's that constant introduction and they get to talk to each other, they get to know each other, then he's going to feel comfortable going to those bank tellers and saying, "Hey, I need help." And because they know who he is, he's one of their regulars, man, they're going to go out of their way to help him. And so as we're talking about, gathering all the pieces on all of this, part of it is also about breaking things down into achievable pieces. Maybe we have somebody who wants to live on their own eventually. Well, that's about mapping out the steps and charting the progress on those steps and celebrating the successes that they achieve. But it's also about researching different options that are out there and making sure you're asking lots of questions because you only know what you know. And it's by asking questions that you find out about new things. And as crazy as this may sound that I'm having to specify this, we need to include the individual in all of this. Because so often, especially when they're younger, we forget to include them. And so we need to encourage and support their inclusion and their participation from a really early age. And I know that that's counterintuitive because, like, when we're talking about, a case conference committee, or we're talking about a waiver quarterly meeting, we don't naturally think, oh, our 4-year-old needs to be there. But they do need to be there, because that is a really valuable tool. We need to reverse, and we need to do that so that we are reversing the messages that others sometimes send. Because sometimes what families hear from other people is, oh, including the individual, is just a distraction. But what they need to hear is that it's about the individual. So of course they should be here. What they hear from others is, oh, that, they make too much noise. Especially if they don't speak verbally, but they make sound. Oh, they make too much noise. Well, of course, we want them to speak up however they verbalize things and tell us what they think. Because guess what? Even if they can't use words, when they are verbalizing sound, that is communication too, and we need to recognize that. What they hear from others is, oh, they don't understand any of this, so they don't need to be there. Or, oh, they're too young for this. Or, this is a business meeting, it's really for the grown-ups. But what families need to hear, and what self-advocates need to hear, is that we want them involved, in part so providers remember who they work for and why they're there. We want families to hear that this helps self-advocates know who they can go to when they need something. And we need self-advocates to recognize, hey, these are the people in your life who can help you when you need that help. And it reinforces, when that self-advocate is included, and especially when they are included as an equal in those meetings, or in the planning process, it reinforces that that self-advocate is valuable and important. It reinforces that they are equal and that they are owed respect. So it's about achieving dreams. And none of this happens overnight. You know, so often when people talk about goals, or things, like, especially, something like, wanting to move out onto your own, people think that means, we've got to do that in 6 months. No, we don't. We can take as much time as we want to, because none of this happens overnight. When our kids were in school, we were so used to, doing the IEP, and the goals were 1-year goals and all of that. Guess what? That only applies to school. You can take as much time as you want to develop your dreams, to develop your plans, and work toward them. And that's what we need to do, is we need to develop a plan and a process to help achieve our dreams. And that means breaking things down into steps, and recognizing that it can take a while, and it can include several different steps. And we need to identify both short-term and long-term goals. So for example, let's say we've got somebody who wants to be able to live on their own. Well, that's our long-term goal, is to be able to live on our own, but then we need to break it down. What do we have to do in order to live on our own? That doesn't mean we're doing it in 6 months, but we've got to figure out, what are the skills we need to make that happen. We need to know how to do laundry. We need to know how to make food. We need to know how to pay bills. We need to know how to clean the bathroom, whatever the case may be. And then identifying those short-term goals of the skills we're going to learn along the way to ultimately achieve that long-term goal. And one of the important things is, we also need to not insist on perfection. Because again, so often when it comes to people with disabilities, we expect perfection, but nobody expects perfection out of us. And in all honesty, we all screw things up sometimes. I used to be a culinary instructor. There are still times I burn when I'm cooking, because of a lot of different reasons. We need to make sure we're not insisting on perfection. We need to recognize what's acceptable, um, and not let our desire for perfection get in the way of what's good. So we need to recognize what's acceptable and we need to recognize when other supports can make something achievable and identify the supports that can aid in success, including alternate ways of achieving something. So, you may have a loved one who, man, they just struggle with the concept of money. And so maybe part of that is using an envelope system to help them learn how to manage money or using auto bill pay. Guess what? We all use auto bill pay in our own lives. Why shouldn't people with disabilities be able to do that? That's just a common thing that everybody uses. And so we should not put a higher burden on them than we expect out of ourselves. Maybe that's setting up auto prescription refill or meal kits or using a video doorbell. So, thinking about, are there alternative ways to achieve the things we want? And remember, dreams can change and adjust, and they should. How many of us are doing the job we wanted to do when we were 18 years old? I know I'm not doing that job. You know, dreams change and adjust, and that happens for all families and all individuals, and it's okay to update your dreams. And so with that, I want to stop sharing my screen and I want to try to make this a little bit more of a conversation. And sometimes as I'm talking to families, they'll say things like, "Carly, that's great for somebody who's high functioning, but that's not my loved one. My loved one isn't able to speak." Okay, that's all right. There's still ways they communicate, but more importantly, they still have their dreams. And a dream can be as simple as, you know, wanting to make sure you get to go swimming every week. It can be something as simple as, you know, like making sure you get your Coke, whatever the case may be. But especially like when I talk about things like employment, that's where I'll hear things like that is, "Oh, but my son doesn't even speak. He can't possibly work." Well, maybe, but you know what? Would he be able to match the picture of the can on his cart to the picture of the can on the shelf? If so, maybe he could restock shelves at a grocery store. Or I'll hear, "Oh, there's no way he could ever live alone." Well, maybe. Let's start trying to work on some of those things if that's what they want, because we've got some self-advocates who they don't want to live on their own. They plan to live with mom and dad for the rest of their lives. Why? Because mom knows how to make pistachio cake, which I would then say, teach him how to make pistachio cake. Um, when my son went to Erskine Green, um, right beforehand, it kind of hit me. Oh, nuts. We forgot he doesn't know how to do laundry. And it's just something I had completely forgotten about. I didn't even think about it. And it never occurred to me to teach him to do laundry. Bad on me, I know that. And so we spent a few months, doing that crash course and teaching him how to do laundry so that he could go to Erskine Green on his own. And I will tell you, now he does laundry for everybody in the house. He is my go-to guy. And I will also say that part of it is we need examples. We need to see people who are successful. We need to see what the possibilities are. I am very lucky in this job, and before I even started here, when I was part of the ARC's Government Affairs Committee, I got to meet some incredible self-advocates. And at the time, my son was only 5 years old, so his diagnosis was still new. We were still caught up in the messages of your child will never. My biggest fights were, fighting with the school to make sure that he could have every opportunity possible and that they were having high expectations and that yes, we are going to make sure that he can read and he can learn and all of that. And don't get me wrong, the school was open to all of that. But in my journey, I got to meet some incredible self-advocates and it opened my eyes. I got to meet an incredible woman named Betty Williams, who was an amazing self-advocate and who who was thoughtful who wanted to make sure self-advocates had every opportunity possible, and who worked on public policy and legislation, and she would testify before the state legislature. She would testify before Congress. And man, if you ever saw Betty Williams, like she would be at a conference and she would go into this gigantic ballroom with all these people around. Man, that woman could work a room like nobody's business, and she would come out with a stack of business cards because she went up and she just introduced herself to everyone so that she could learn who people were and learn what they did, so that then when she wanted to work on something or wanted to create a new program or wanted to change the world, she'd call those people up. And guess what? They all remembered her as the mom of a 5-year-old with a disability who was constantly getting the message, your child will never be able to do anything. Meeting Betty Williams and seeing all the things she could do was amazing to me. And she opened my eyes. She is the one who showed me that that message, your child will never, was complete nonsense. And my sons got to grow up around Betty, and they got to see her every so often. And Betty would always talk to my older son about being a self-advocate and what it meant to be a self-advocate. And my son is very shy. It takes a long time for him to warm up to people. And the irony with him is that he is not the kind of person who will necessarily advocate for himself very often. But he will gladly advocate for other people, because to him that is him protecting others. That is him standing up for others. That he will always do. And for years, Betty tried to get him to join self-advocates, to be a self-advocate, to take part in self-advocates, and he didn't necessarily want to do that. It was, he didn't think that was something that really interested him. That seemed like way too much, especially because um, when Betty passed away, Andy was still a teenager. Um, but she was always talking to him about that and encouraging him and reminding him all the things he could do and that he could do this. And, several years later, my son finally did start going to self-advocate meetings. You know, um, like I said, he'll stand up for other people, not always himself, but he will, talk to a legislator or send in an email to a legislator about protecting Medicaid, because he knows that that's something he needs and he knows that other people need it. I got to meet an incredible woman named Melody Cooper, who who is an incredibly good friend of mine. She's very dear to me. But she showed me that self-advocates can just have a regular life too. And don't get me wrong, she has gone all over the country too, advocating, and she's part of Self-Advocates Becoming Empowered's national board, and she teaches young people with disabilities about supported decision making and their right to make their own decisions and all of that. She was the first self-advocate I knew who was married, because she was. And she and her husband just had a regular life, just like anybody else had. And as ridiculous as this sounds, that's not something that occurred to me, because I was told, oh, your child will never get married. Your child will never have a family. And she showed me that that was nonsense. I met Sean Fulton, who owned his own business. He owned a DJ business for something like 10 years. And he and his best friend would DJ all sorts of parties in their community, and they would get hired by different self-advocacy organizations too to come DJ their events, because we don't think about people with disabilities owning their own businesses, and they can. And that doesn't mean that they have to do everything alone. None of us do that alone. You know, People own their own businesses. They don't do it all on their own. They hire tax preparers, they hire attorneys, they hire consultants to help them with their business. So again, part of that is also making sure that as we're thinking about those possibilities, that we're not putting unreasonable expectations on any of that either. And so I want to open it up to you guys, go ahead and go into the Q&A and tell me what your thoughts are on all of this. Ask whatever questions you have, because the other reality of all of this is that this is about people coming together to brainstorm ideas together, to support one another, to share our lived experience in what has worked for us and what hasn't worked for us. But it's about giving ourselves permission to dream again, you know. And don't get me wrong, sometimes those dreams are modified, I and but at the same time, those dreams are modified for all of our kids, you know. Um, I recognize my son is not going to be a senator. He has no interest in that. And he's not really a people person. It takes him a long time to warm up to people. So that is not where his strengths lie. But he is really, really good at um at procedure. He is really good at recognizing when something is off. He will remind me, "Mom, you forgot to do this." And he's right. He takes care of me. He makes sure I have the things that I need. So this is very much a reciprocal relationship. But the reality is, for my younger son who does not have a developmental disability, my dreams for him are not his dreams for himself. And that's just true of parenting in general. And so we need to be able to adjust our dreams, you know, um, and adjust our expectations and all of that. So, no, my son's not going to be a senator. Can he live on his own? Someday he can, and he has shown that, but he's also told me he's not ready for that yet. So we keep working on some of those skills. We keep those skills sharp, and eventually someday he will be able to live on his own. And I recognize that that may not necessarily happen for everyone, or that may not be a dream for everyone. But what are their dreams? And maybe it's just being able to, to I'm thinking of a young man I know who has pretty significant cerebral palsy. He does not speak, and you know, th- he has a lot of needs. He's a high needs individual, but at the same time, he's got a sense of humor. And he is very subtle, but he pulls pranks on people, as much as he can, you know, um, but for him, part of his dream, part of his good life is making sure he can watch slapstick comedy. Now, personally, that is not my thing, but it's his, and that's the part that matters. So it's making sure that he can watch his movies. Maybe it's making sure he gets to go to the library so he can check movies out so he can watch new movies. What are your loved ones' dreams? What are the things I don't necessarily want to say what are the things you struggle with, but what are the things that, you know, that make make you question, what to do next? Or what are the things that are a barrier for you in all of this? Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions on the Q&A. And so what I will say too is that, as you go along, whenever you have questions or whenever you want to talk some of this through with somebody, give us a call here at the Arc of Indiana. That's exactly what we're here for. Every one of us is a parent, a self-advocate, or a sibling, so we all live this life too, you know, and it can be helpful to talk to somebody who understands, to someone who has been there. Oh, we got something in the Q&A. So, oh, it's a good parent who I know, who is also a self-advocate in her own right, saying that she knows her daughter would love to have a job. And that's exactly right. And you know, so part of that is exposing her to different jobs that are out there so that it's not just, well, Lowe's is hiring, let's get you a job at Lowe's. It's what does she want to do? what are her strengths? What are the things she's really good at? When my son started his current job, he was the first employee they ever had with a disability. And so they weren't 100% sure what to expect. And it was a new situation for Andy too. And one of the things they had him do, like his second week there, they had him print up new price stickers for the shoes that were about to go on clearance. And, for him, that was an easy thing to do because he's really good at procedure. He's really good at process. Once you teach him the steps in something, he's really good at doing that. And so, they had him do these things and he printed them up and he printed them up really, really quickly. He actually wound up saving them an entire day's worth of man hours because of how fast he did it. And they were thrilled with him. That played to his strength. He's really good at process. He's really good at procedure. He's really good at steps. Not so great in customer service because it just makes him super anxious, you know? So it's playing to our loved ones' strengths that makes all of those things happen. And it's making sure that we allow our loved ones to dream and we allow ourselves to dream again too. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope you enjoyed tonight, and we'd love to see you next month for Ask the Ark. I'm trying to actually arrange a guest speaker. So thank you so much and have a wonderful night. Bye-bye.